Suzanne Ramsey, and it kind of worked this way. I'll just tell the listening audience really quick. I had heard this story and looked into it a little bit when I first started getting into the show. And then I heard the story about Con and the Scully, I believe it is, and how it just seemed like there was a con man out there. This whole thing was made up, and there was a figure of $25,000 and to pay if the story panned out or whatever. So I just assumed that this was totally just a false story, and I didn't really pay attention to it. And I didn't realize that there was more to it than just that. I talked quite a bit with Dave Marler, and was driving on the road one day, and he started talking about this case, and I said, isn't it a hoax? And he said, I thought it was too. There's really something to this. And he said, you ought to have the Ramseys on and to talk about it. So not only do we have the Ramseys, we also have Dr. Thayer, who also worked on this project. And we're going to be talking about that tonight, the twists and turns and questions. We will take calls in the last part of the show. But for right now, I'd like to welcome on our guests. I'm probably going to have to do a little bit of adjusting here. So hang on just a minute, and here we go. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Martin.
Hi, Martin.
Everyone have their...
Frank, do you need to put on your... Oh, he's got it. Okay.
We got it.
Yeah. So welcome to the show. And
Thank you.
you heard what I said. I always thought there was... this was just a hoax, and so we're going to clear that up tonight, hopefully. And so I do get a lot of new listeners to the show, and a lot of people are totally unfamiliar with the Aztec incident. And I'm going to ask one of you, or both two or three, you can all chime in on. Let's give a nutshell of exactly what happened back in 1948, if you would.
Frank, you want to start?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I think that we've actually had two books on this, and I was fortunate enough to meet the Ramseys back in 2009. But as you know, Roswell began in about 78 is when it really began, the 47 crash. And Aztec didn't start to see the light of day until about 1986. But Scott Ramsey is a wonderful researcher. He went to where it happened. This is one of those places that we know exactly, X marks the spot, where the flying saucer settled to Earth and was found by the military. We now know that the cover-up was so good that it was better than Roswell. And the J.P. Con job that you mentioned was very well done. And it was brutal. But let's start with the March 25th, 1948. There was a lot of flying saucer activity in New Mexico. This was ground zero for flying saucer activities. I'm a New Mexico native, by the way. And this flying saucer came over northern New Mexico, followed by some deputies, went past a ranch house, hit a bluff across from the rancher's land, went on over, went straight north, and landed on a mesa, Hart Canyon Mesa, about 11 miles from Aztec, New Mexico. And here it was, intact, no damage, nothing. But obviously something was wrong because the landing gear didn't come out. It was just leaning over on the mesa. And some oil field guys were there early in the morning. They heard there was a fire because they had some oil drip tanks below the mesa. They wanted to check to make sure there was no danger. And they went up on the mesa and they saw this 100-foot aluminum disc with a dome on top. And they didn't know what it was. They had no idea. They didn't know anything about flying saucers. And they were playing around on that. And a few hours later, here comes the military. And no one was sure whether it was Army or Air Force, but they were there. And they took charge. They debriefed everybody, but not before some of these guys actually got up and walked around on this disc. Walked around on it. And, it's sort of, there's some ranchers there who said something like, hey, you kids, get off of there. You don't know where it's been. But this kind of thing. And they found a way to open it. And every story that does this shows that there was a hole in one of the ports in the dome, about the size of a quarter. And somehow, some way, somebody stuck a pole into that hole and hit a button inside, and the whole thing opened up. You saw the day the Earth stood still. You remember that?
Yeah.
And the saucer opened up. That's apparently exactly what it did. And they found 16 childlike bodies dead inside the craft. There's a lot more to that story, but we wouldn't know anything about it if Scott had not followed it like a bulldog. And he and Suzanne got together while he was doing the research. That was a love story that they can tell you about sometime. And the facts just fit. Scott found two witnesses, two oil field guys now in their late in life. Two oil field guys, didn't know each other, but they were both on the mesa that morning. And he interviewed both of them. They told identical stories. And it's chilling. We have actually a tape recording of one of their accounts. And I think that is what convinced me there was no collusion. That's a favorite word of ours these days. And these two people who were there, they saw the saucer, they saw the bodies, and they were debriefed and told they could never talk about it. But they were in their late stage of life. One of them had had several strokes, and he knew he was dying, and he told Scott the story, and it unfolded from there. And everything that Scott has come up with and what we have in our book is documented. I dare anybody to argue that this event did not happen. Now, let me turn it over to Scott and Suzanne and let them embellish and tell us some more stuff.
Yeah.
If I can just offer, you had mentioned one of the first things when you were visiting with Dave Marler that it was a hoax. And I'd like to just put a little light and put this in perspective. If you only watch part of a movie, you either miss the beginning or you miss the end, you never really know that movie. You walk away thinking, I know what that movie is about. Later on, you watch a movie and you think, holy cats, it's nothing like I originally thought. That's the case of the Aztec story. The folks that put on the internet that it was a hoax did very little research. They researched it to a point and they stopped. They didn't deeply research it. They stopped. And so they did not have all of the information. And there were, 3 or 4 people that put the term hoax associated with it. The problem is none of them had ever even been to the crash site, ever. None of them had really done any research, so they really didn't know the story. And I think what is so powerful about this story, and with the 3 of us all doing research on it, what we've been able to do is document, as Frank was describing, the pre-incident, where there were experiences, in fact, even deeper than what Frank did. He just gave you a little bit of an idea about it, but the research that was done, the folks that were there, the scientists studying the crafts before the actual incident, the incident itself, the scientists that worked on the craft, and then how the cover-up went. And I don't use that term lightly, cover-up. It gets overused all the time. Very specifically, we can document all of that. And there is no other case that we have over 55,000 documents to document this. So it's a little bit different than just telling, well, there's a story, or my friend saw, or hearsay. There's actual documentation, which I feel really supports a true case.
Now, are you talking about documentation of a cover-up, or are you talking about documentation about the case happening?
All the above.
All of it.
We have documents from the FBI, CIA, Army Counterintelligence Division. A lot of the documents involved in that collection of 55,000 are tax records. documents of the people that claimed they lived in Aztec at the time, newspaper articles, interviews we did with people, including Robert McClay, who worked with J.P. Kahn. So it's
qualifying. So some of it's actually documents, as Scott said, from the military and the government, but some of it's actually qualifying your witnesses.
Mhm.
Anybody can say anything, and certainly I'm sure that you're familiar with this, Martin. On the internet, you can throw anything you want on there. You don't even have to use your real name, you know.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that this is a case to be reckoned with, and we're very honored that we are able to share this information.
Well, great. Well, we're at our first break, and we are going to go into that right now. So hang in, everyone. We'll be right back right after these messages. All right. Welcome back. Here we are. And so I want to continue talking about, the crash and, the witnesses. I think, the firsthand testimony is about the best you can get. And I know just like Roswell, it's a long time ago. As a matter of fact, we're on an anniversary yesterday, right?
Yesterday's 71st.
71st anniversary. So think about that. Someone has to be most likely in their 90s that witnessed that. Is there anyone left?
No, they've all passed. Doug Nolan was 19 at the time. He had just started with El Paso Oil, and he died, as Frank was saying, after multiple strokes a few years back. But yeah, unfortunately, unless there's a couple hidden out there that we haven't found or met yet, it looks like everybody's passed on.
And speaking of that, does it happen where someone will come forward after they read your book or they see something on television or YouTube or something like that? And has that happened?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
We're working with a gentleman right now. Obviously, he wasn't there at the time, but we're still digging. He approached us in 2016. So far, everything checks out to his story. Tax records that he lived in Dayton, Ohio at the time. His daughter's school records when she entered kindergarten. And he claims he worked as a outside contractor on a flying saucer that came from Aztec, New Mexico. So
when Scott's describing that about qualifying him, there's usually takes us about 2.5 years to qualify when we get information. It's not a quick process. We work on it on a regular basis. I mean, usually some every day. But it takes time. And when he was saying about the daughter's kindergarten records or tax records or things, we have to go through numerous stages to prove that that person is not only who they say they are, where they were at, and information about them, and to really qualify them and establish that they are a good witness, as opposed to someone just making it up. That happens plenty.
Yeah. I guess I'll direct this question at Frank. We want to get everyone involved here. So the crash is, the craft is coming. People are seeing it. They're seeing it wobble, and which is unusual. Is there, and of course there's a lot of speculation about all of this or any of this. At that time, were they speculating that the beings inside were just all dead and they were blackened, right?
Charred. Dark brown, crispy critters.
And but there was no sign of fire inside of the craft.
No, none.
And would that have to do with the little tiny hole, or any?
It could be decompression, but also, as Scott found out in his research, that at that time, the United States had some of the most powerful radar in the world. This is radar. Of course, radar is just microwave beams, and they were so strong that they could cook birds in the air. Wow. And so there was that thought that maybe these craft were defenseless against the kind of radar we had right after World War II. And there was a site at El Vado, which is not that far away from Aztec, that was in full operation at that time, and that may have done it. but we'll never know. We have no idea what caused their death, but we do agree now that with the kind of remote control we have today, that the saucer could be set down without any human assistance.
Right. Yeah. And
It's
so
kind of an autopilot.
yeah.
That's what you're saying.
But it didn't really. It sort of crashed, but it didn't. There was no damage that anybody could see. And I don't know who wants to do this, but can someone describe the craft as well as you can, of what people were claiming it looked like?
Scott can tell you he's even had a model made.
Oh, yes.
I should have got that. I should have got that on the break.
Yeah.
We have a 1/72nd scale model made of it. Like Frank was saying, just short of 100 feet in diameter. It had a raised dome on the top and a smaller dome on the bottom. It was lenticular is the best description for it. It was very thin cross section. The only raised section that made any sense was what we, for the lack of a better word, the cabin area, the raised dome on the top. The craft, we don't know what kind of material it was. It was aluminum looking or pewter looking, kind of a dull finish to it.
3 floors.
3 stories to it. When the oil field workers, the young kids, basically went in, they could see three levels. The craft had portholes on the top deck, the top dome. Frank referenced one had a hole in it the size of about a quarter. Other than that, it was a very plain sight. I wanted to add, when the oil field workers got there, they did not think anything extraterrestrial. They were thinking, with all the things that were flying over New Mexico and being tested in New Mexico during and after World War II, they thought this was really one of ours. Mm-hmm. And climbing on it wasn't really recreation, so to speak. It was more of a rescue mission. They were trying to get into their craft to see if anybody was hurt.
In fact, at that time, there was actually a helicopter that flew over, and one of the witnesses said they weren't sure which they were more mesmerized by, the craft or the helicopter, because helicopters had just been introduced to the public. So that'll give you an idea. Certainly today we would be mesmerized by the saucer, but because helicopters are so common.
And there were no visible seams or rivets or anything like that. That's what. And are the descriptions consistent between all the witnesses that are known?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even going back to Frank Scully and the late Bill Steinman, Bill and I compared notes for 30 years. And right before he died a year ago, this past January, Bill gave us a lot of good documents and a lot of his notes that Frank and Suzanne and I have reviewed. And even his notes from his people back in the 80s are very consistent with our witnesses. Fortunately, we had different groups of witnesses at the time.
And people that were from different parts of the country, and didn't know each other. So that was helpful to see that too, that there was that consistency.
Now, were there people that later on in life, toward the end of their life, they decided to talk about this, or did people, keep it to themselves for the most part, as far as you know?
Both, yeah. Doug Nolan actually contacted Bill Steinman well after Bill's book had been written. And so Bill handed him off to us, and we interviewed him. We have it's almost a 2-hour taped interview with him. And he was very consistent as best he could remember after a series of strokes. But I mean, he took us back to the day, everything that went on, a pretty good timeline of how long they were there until the military showed up, which some say early afternoon, and in Doug's case, he said it was late morning, getting toward lunchtime, but still extremely quick when you figure that terrain. I mean, Frank's been there numerous times. I've been there many, many times. It's not easy today to get anybody out there.
We just this last week had a researcher that was out there and giving him directions, and and hiking around out there. It's quite an ordeal. If you go, you need to make sure that you have gas in your vehicle and have some bottles of water and
Blankets.
blankets. Think about those kind of things because things happen. Just do.
How far away is the nearest military base?
Today or back then?
Back then.
Oh, let's see. Probably Kirkland would have been the closest. Alvado, as Frank was saying, as a crow flies, is not that far. That was the radar base. Then you had Moriarty down by Albuquerque. That wasn't quite open at the time, so we'll roll that out. Continental Divide was under construction, but it wasn't operational. And then you get up into the Colorado area. The Durango Airport used to be a training base during World War II, but then was turned over to the county. There were a lot of hidden training camps in that area back in that time frame.
Like Camp Hale.
Yeah, there's probably a lot more than that one, and that's why we're always amazed at that helicopter, where it came from to get to the crash site, because we know we went down to McMinnville when they had the large air museum down there. We flew out, and there were 2 helicopters in service. It went into service January of '48. They have copies of both, and we sat down and went over the helicopters and went over it with the curator. That did not have a long range. Either one of them didn't have a very long range of flying. So it didn't stay at the crash site long. It kind of did 2 passes to confirm that there was something down on the mesa, and then it took off to the northeast.
Okay, so this thing is crash landed, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, crashed or landed or both. And people are around it, and I remember reading in your book that they thought the object was light. So was this was say 100 feet, which is amazing, pretty big.
Yeah.
Were like a few people able to actually move the object at all? Did they talk about that?
I've had different reports on that. I'm going to leave it like this. When they removed it from the crash site, of course, we reenacted that back a number of years ago, the moving of the craft. And the Dragon Wagon, that's the M24 tank removal vehicle, that had I think the capability was 50,000 pounds. And apparently whatever the weight of this object was extremely light, because they had no problems moving it.
I think it would be, a reader would find that chapter, I think it's chapter 11, if I'm not mistaken, Moving the Craft, very meticulously reenacted by the Ramseys and a friend of theirs who is an expert in moving of heavy equipment. I recommend that to the readers, definitely.
All right. So there was a pad found out there, a slab, cement, and there was speculation that the crane was put on this. Is that how that goes?
Yeah, they really had to cut a road in to get the craft out. And we refer to that as the mystery road or the military road. And interviewing a gentleman that was based down at Walker Airfield told me, I was not at the crash site, but when they cut the road, they had a problem with the loose silt. And he said, I know we were delayed a few days because they had to pour concrete. So a dear friend of ours, Randy Barnes, went out probing around one day, and this is very silty soil. It's mini gravel.
Sand, yeah.
Yeah, sand and mini gravel. And he uncovered it. Bill Steinman had found it back in the mid-'80s. But with all the erosion and rain and whatnot, it had been covered up again. But that was a stabilizing pad, according to our military person that we refer to as George in the book. And sure enough, that road was cut, and sure enough, that pad is there. And so we found that part.
And there's no other reason for that pad or for that road to be there. If you are familiar with the oil fields out in New Mexico, they have roads, they have maps of every single little teeny road that exists. They have to, to get parts and things to the oil field workers. And there's no reason for that pad or that road to be there. And we've consulted with oil field workers, people that are out in that area, experts in the field, literally in the field, and there's no reason for it. And to the fact, we've had people speculate and say, well, it's to cover a well. There's no way, because we actually drilled into it to get a core sample. We've had a variety of people toss things out as their speculation, but what the witness that Scott described, George, seems very credible.
Now, what about?
It makes very much sense.
Go ahead, Martin. I'm sorry.
What about radar? They would, that's the only time I could think anyone would pour a slab is to have a radar set up. Whether a building or the radar itself. So is there a way to map out where the radar was located? The one you mentioned
at
earlier?
Alvado, at Alvado, the radar pads are still intact, and they're huge. I mean, they're
very different.
Yeah, they're actually a big pillar that they would set down the legs of a radar apparatus. This is just about a meter square. It's tiny. I mean, in comparison.
And would it work? A meter square, wow. Would it work as far as the location goes and where the mesa, where the purported crash happened? Does everything fit, is what I'm asking.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying, is it builds as you follow it, because there is no other explanation for it.
The Mystery Road comes down. It was actually like a cul-de-sac. It went around a little tiny mesa. And according to George, when they cut the road, they had an issue with it being too silty. And if you ever look up an M24 tank vehicle or recovery vehicle, they had stabilizing legs like the back of a backhoe that would come down to stabilize the recovery vehicle. Mm-hmm. And then if you walk out 300 yards, give or take, from that pad is where the plaque is, where the disc allegedly landed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's go back to the day of the crash or crash landing, whatever you want to call it. So that happens. There are witnesses around. The military shows up fairly quickly. Do they permanently shoo people out of there? I mean, they get the military involved in actually guarding the area. Is that what the speculation, or is there any way to, any documents on that?
No documents, but the locals say it was about a 2-week recovery process.
But that particular day, although the military did come and question all of the witnesses, and then what term do I want to use? Threaten all the witnesses,
reminded them of their
loyalty
to the United States.
But the one person that they did welcome after they shoot everybody else off was a minister that was passing by. And he was from Mancos, Colorado, a new minister, Baptist minister, and he was doing some circuit preaching. And as he passed by, he saw some activity down on the road. And so he went out there thinking, well, if there's somebody hurt or something, maybe I could help. And he got there, and they said, we need you to come up here. We need some help from you. And he said, sure, I'd be happy to. Well, he climbs the hill, and he gets over the bluff and on top of the mesa, and here he sees these bodies all laying there. And he went over, and he wasn't, they indicated, prayer and things, and he was not a priest for last rites, but he went over and said prayers on the bodies, and then just left, got in his vehicle, and drove back to Mancos. He was so shook up that he called some of his parishioners that were close friends of his, and they gathered in a room, and he said, I have to tell you something that happened to me today, and it just shook me up, and I just need to share this with you. And so he begins to tell them the story, and one of the people in the group, you can imagine, you hear a story like that, you're uncomfortable probably, but the man went, huh, like that, and
cleared his throat.
And the minister just began to weep and said, you don't believe me, and got very defensive and upset. And he said, you think I would tell you this if it wasn't true? And we were able to interview a child that was there during this, when this all went on. And
He was 9 years old at
he
the
was 9
time.
years old at the time. And so,
And then the son of the preacher.
and then the son of the preacher.
And
So-
they recall more or less
All
this
of this.
happening.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
So there's another angle there to it, another layer to it. Someone that you wouldn't think would be participating in.
And that 9-year-old boy went on to be a vice president of a major airline, so his credibility was very good with us. We believed him. It's when we tell the story of our research, we've always been amazed in that small town, in that small area. It's not like we had Otis the town drunk, as our source. We had some we've been lucky to have very, very credible people that went on to be very successful, and we've always kind of questioned that. But these are people that if you sat down and you talked with, you would find that they would be a perfect witness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a break coming up in like 5 minutes from now, just to let you know.
Okay.
So now the disassembling. This is just one of the areas that I think is, well, first of all, no one's going to move a 100-foot craft anywhere too far.
That's right.
And the thing that's puzzling, or that something would come apart. It came apart supposedly with pins. And even though it's a smooth surface, how would you speculate that they figured that part of it out, how to disassemble it?
Going from a little bit of Frank Scully's research, Bill Steinman's, and then just, of course, we weren't there, but it was a series of what we would call today PIB pins. Are you familiar with PIB pins?
Yeah, like for tractors and things like that.
Tractors, Formula One cars, Indianapolis type style race cars. The wings are held on with PIB pins, the bodywork. We have 3 tractors here at our farm, and of course we lose pins all the time, but they've come a long way. I mean, the old days of just banging a pin through to hold an implement on and putting a drop latch in it, hitch pin, I think they call it. And this, in all the descriptions, it reminds me of the PIB pins that they use. A friend of ours has an aerobatic plane, and that whole wing assembly is put together with PIB pins.
Now, how did the word get out about the pins?
Probably an interview that Frank Scully did with one of the scientists that told him how the craft came apart. That goes back to 1950.
And I just think it's, I'm not doubting that it happened, but I'm just thinking it's a really weird thing that something would come apart like that. Not just the fact that it appeared to be completely smooth and all that, but just the fact that, who knows what technology it was or whatever, but it just seems unusual that something would be assembled and be able to be disassembled.
Well, you look at when we were down at Maxwell years ago, reading about the 4602 Air Intelligence Recovery Group. One of their proud cases of something they had to disassemble and bring back to Wright-Patterson was an early MiG jet fighter that the pilot ran low on fuel and ditched it in a river. And that's one of my favorite things that I've ever gotten out of Maxwell. 7 guys living under a bridge with bull ropes at night would go down in the water and take off a wing or a stabilizer and the landing gears, and they smuggled the whole thing out in a hay wagon. That's a very well-documented case down at Maxwell. Brought it back to Wright-Patterson and proudly reassembled it, minus the ejection seat and the cockpit and the canopy.
Isn't that something? Wow.
It shows how good these guys are.
Wow. And we got another minute, just a minute here left or so. Did anyone ever talk about feeling ill or any physical effects from the object?
Yes.
Do you want to handle that one, Frank, just to get you in there?
Well, our new source that we haven't really exploited yet said that there was some discussion in Dayton about the fact that this saucer, reassembled in Wright-Patterson, that you couldn't go into it for very long because you would get ill. And apparently some people who were retrieving material from it on the mesa and so on, that they did get ill. And some of them were very serious. We don't know how serious it was. And that's a very peculiar thing, that the atmosphere inside this disk was toxic to humans.
They said no more than 20 minutes a person couldn't last.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would think that they would get, in like a hazmat suit to even go in the thing. I don't know what they had back in 1948, but still.
Yes, I don't think they did. It's just like when I was training, I didn't have ear protectors for on the firing range either. These things came later.
Yeah. All right.
Because of that.
We're up against the break. So, all right, hang in, everyone. We'll be right back. Hang in there right after these messages. Don't go. All right, welcome back. Here we are. And we are talking about the Aztec UFO incident back in 1948. Interesting case. It's interesting that there's so many strands, so many spokes to this thing. Now, Scott, you and I talked on the phone months ago for quite a while, and I remember you saying to me something along the lines where you kept trying to, weed out if this was a hoax or not, and you kept coming up like, wow, more and more as you went along, like more and more there was really something to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That still happens today.
And so, what are the big arguments against it that you first tackled?
Oh wow, there were so many. I didn't know when I was out in the Four Corners area anything about an Aztec UFO crash. I was familiar with Roswell, we all are. And I thought at first, are the people confusing Roswell with Aztec, even though we're at two opposite ends of the state? It was blackballed so early. I mean, the military did a great job with the help of J.P. Kahn and others to say, and I speculate on this, but they did such a lousy job covering up Roswell by putting it on the front page of the Roswell paper and other papers all the way out to California and all the way far east as Missouri. I think this time they had a plan that we're going to have a recovery operation a lot better than what we did at Roswell. Keep in mind, you learn from your mistakes, and Roswell was probably the first. I think the first thing that would come up in people's mind about Aztec is the fact that the Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer were, during the investigation on Aztec, they were dragged into court on some civil charges, not criminal like everybody likes to say, saying that they tried to defraud some oil investors, claiming the technology that they had was superior to anybody's because it's of alien technology.
The doodle bug, right? Is that
the infamous doodle bug? We have actually a picture of it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with all of that is, if you look at it from the way the story was told, similar to what Suzanne was saying earlier, if you only hear part of the story and you don't hear the whole story, and then the whole story being that Frank Scully sued Purdy from, what was the magazine, Frank?
True
Magazine. And Frank Scully turned around with the help of Silas Newton, and they sued everybody involved in that. And it appears there was a rather large out-of-court settlement that, again, because it's Aztec, you don't hear about that. You got to go digging through the archives to find all that.
If I can mention something real quick, if you're not familiar with this story, this seems a little abstract. Silas Newton, let's say who Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer. They actually were, I'll say, friends with Frank Scully, who is the author of the first book. And they approached him, and they were approached by 9 scientists that worked on the craft to tell the story. Frank Scully wrote all types of biographies. He was a very famous writer. He wrote for Variety magazine too, but he wrote for all different types of things, and all over the world, in fact. And he had a very great reputation for taking people in that were going through a hard time in their life and keeping their secrets. And so he seemed like, now this part is my speculation, he seemed like the perfect person that you could tell secrets to and then have him tell it. Mm-hmm. And so the scientists confided in him, and Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer were the two liaisons, is that how we kind of want to say?
The catalyst.
That approached Scully. And so when this story was attacked by, and we need to go on and tell about who J.P. Kahn is, so that you know who that player is too. But when the government and J.P. Kahn attacked this, they went after to discredit the people that were telling this story. So I just want you to see the big picture, and it's a very complex story, as you said, and if you're not familiar with the story, you think, well, where did these people come from, and where did this hoax come up? Yeah. But there was an effort to discredit everybody that was involved. And they just, one by one, started taking them apart.
Yeah, everybody that was involved in Aztec at some point was dragged down the rabbit hole and discredited. And Silas Newton, just in case people in your audience aren't familiar with the case, at that time he was one of the wealthiest men in the country doing oil speculation. And he had oil, all the old-time oil guys in the Four Corners knew of Silas Newton. Mm-hmm. And that's how he heard about the story. His claim to fame was the rediscovery of the Wrangley oil fields up in Colorado.
But they attacked him because, I didn't mean to interrupt you, they attacked him because he did oil speculation, and that's exactly what it is. It's never 100%. That's the risk. Mm-hmm. So that's how they attacked him. You know, you take the weakest link, and if it's, that's how they went about attacking him.
But to fully answer the question you asked, it was looking at the whole story, looking at how it started to crumble apart, and then kind of looking at, well, what made it crumble?
What caused it? Yep.
And just the research on the alleged scientists that Scully talked about, the Dr. G's, that part of the book was 3 years just researching those scientists.
And the Dr. G's wasn't his real name, right? Is that,
that it was a collection of the eight to nine scientists. There were 9, one died, and Scully gave him the overall name of Dr. G.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember that you researched for a long time trying to find, I'm going to say Bass or a name, something like that. And
Donald Bass.
Yeah. What was the reason for that?
Virgil Riggs, who lived in Aztec, later went into the military. He's actually been in several branches, but at the time the Air Force. And while stationed over in England, he met a gentleman that was much older than him that had an Aztec, Virgil had an Aztec sticker on his little sports car, his British sports car. And Bass said, Aztec, New Mexico, and knew all about Aztec. And as they got to be good friends, they both stood up at each other's wedding. They're on the same bowling team, and on and on. He confided in Virgil. He said, the reason I know about Aztec is I worked on a flying saucer recovery out there. Hmm. But Donald Bass has disappeared. We think we found him, and I think he's passed on now. But the story in the group of that Air Force came back that he was killed by a hit-and-run driver in Vietnam.
Right.
Which maybe so, maybe not. Some say, well, his name's on the Vietnam Memorial. Well, according to the Vietnam Memorial, there's a lot of names on that wall.
Right.
But I think he actually survived. I think I actually talked to him. And the irony is I probably drove by where he lived several times. He retired down here in the Southeast.
Wow. Okay. And where does Flock fit into this whole thing?
Carl Flock was an interesting character. Carl was ex-United States Marine Corps, later recruited by the CIA, and he never made any bones about that. He didn't try to hide that part. He was very active in various UFO groups over the years. He was real active in APRO when they were around. And Carl lived just north of Albuquerque, actually up near where Dave Marler lives. And he just appeared out of nowhere when I started digging into Aztec. I mean, it was just like I flipped on a light switch and there was Carl. I didn't know who Carl was, and he had a big interest in our research. We could do a whole show on Carl. I mean, he actually intercepted documents that were sent out of my office. But things like J.P. Kahn, he called me one day and said, no, there's really no need to research J.P. Kahn. He died. I was out in San Francisco and learned he died. And I said, when? He said, years ago. Well, that turned out not to be very accurate at all. He died in 2005. Mm-hmm. Carl was steering me all the time to keep away from people that were alive.
And why do you suppose that more of an ongoing cover-up?
I do. Wow. I firmly believe that. When we discovered the radar bases, because Scully had mentioned the radar bases and Steinman in his book, and the reason the UFO community, for the lack of a better word, poo-pooed the radar bases is they'd come up to me and say, nobody's ever found them. And that was true. Nobody ever found the radar bases because they were filed under the, what was that group, Frank, back then? Wasn't the Air Force. Atomic Energy Commission.
Oh, okay.
Having these radio shows late in the day doesn't do me any good.
Yeah, it's been a long day already.
We've had a long day. Atomic Energy Commission had built the bases to protect Los Alamos, and it wasn't until years later they turned them over to the Air Force. But they were up and running. So if you were looking at the Air Force archives for the radar bases, you weren't going to find them. And the Air Force actually found them on our behalf at the archives of the Atomic Energy Commission.
Now,
Carl Flock was one of those people that he would always profess how he was such an avid believer in the UFOs and they exist, but his statement always would be, I just don't believe this case, or I just don't believe that case.
Yeah, Roswell and Aztec, where there were physical and good evidence, didn't fit into his bailiwick. But
Carl was a one-of-a-kind guy. I can say that.
well, let's talk about the physical trace evidence. I know there's a scratch on a mesa that looks suspiciously like it could be something, but is there anything else that you'd consider trace evidence?
I wish Ted Phillips was on the show because he had an interesting time when he was out at the crash site. Things that we noticed when we reenacted the crash or the removal of the craft, that had to go a really specific way down through Largo Canyon and Pump Canyon because of even though, as we talked earlier, you took the craft apart in sections, they were still good-sized sections. And going through those canyons, we have what the experts call pinch concerns, pinch areas. And as Bill and I were taking the reenactment out, we noticed, and things don't really deteriorate much in the desert. Along certain roads where trees had been cut down, not far from the crash site. I mean, I'm talking less than 1/8 of a mile from the crash site. That trees had been cut down and the old stumps of the cottonwood trees and whatnot were still there. Could you consider that evidence? Yeah, I don't know. The concrete slab is one that we tend to lean to. The fact that where the craft allegedly came down on the mesa, when we first got there, and Bill Steinman years ahead of me, the dead trees were still there that were all knocked down toward the northeast. The Bureau of Reclamation or the Bureau of Land Management made us move them to a safe place and get them off the trail because they knew we're having people go up to the crash site like people do every day right now. So it's
Can I mention one?
Yeah, go ahead.
When we saw something very interesting, depending on where you're at, you see a different perspective of things. And in a flight over the top. Now, this was before drones and things, but in a flight over the top of the crash site, it's very interesting. You know, in nature, there is a random pattern of how plants and trees and things grow. It was very interesting. In certain areas, right on top of that mesa, they were pinions planted in exact rows, which would be something logically that we would do without even thinking about it. You would transplant something not thinking organically the way the patterns it would grow. So that was a very interesting perspective to see that you would never know from the ground. You wouldn't be able to tell that.
If someone was trying to hide a site, though, it'd be kind of strange for them to plant like that. If they were trying to, bring it back, like you say, organically.
But I don't think that they even thought about that. For one thing, again, it's not like you had the air travel that you do today, for one thing, and I don't think they were thinking from that perspective.
I think it's very common for military to restore crash sites.
Yes.
To appear as though nothing ever happened.
Right.
And so I'm sure that they did restore that site to as near original as possible to cover their departure.
Right.
But I don't think they thought about the planting patterns. I don't think they thought about that.
Yeah. I spoke to someone that actually did that, but he did that for like quarries and things like that. Tried to bring them back to look the way they did.
Yes.
I think I would like to take some calls. Are you up for that?
Yeah, great.
And so the number, let me get it up on the screen here in just a minute. Patience, everyone. I'm doing the shows solo again here. No one working in the background, so it's just me. But anyway, so the call is, we got someone calling right now. And hello, caller. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello. Who do I have here?
David Marler.
Hey, David.
Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How are you, Dave?
Hey, Dave, how are you?
Thanks for calling in, Dave.
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm just enjoying the show.
Oh,
Well,
are your ears burning?
yeah.
They were. I told myself I better tune into podcast UFO here. My ears are burning. Someone's talking about me.
Oh.
Yeah.
We should point out that Dave's working on a book himself, right, Dave?
Slowly but surely, Dr. Thayer. Trying to get there, but as Scott and Suzanne knows, as well as yourself, it's hard to juggle work and family and UFO research.
Yes.
Yes.
So true.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone on the phone, none of us make our living doing this. This is, something on the side. But I just wanted to say I had the pleasure of going to Maxwell Air Force Base with my fiance back in February 2018 with Scott and Suzanne, and they were my guides, so to speak, in introducing me to Maxwell Air Force Base and the files there, and just had a wonderful time. And I just wanted to say, Martin, firsthand, I've witnessed their research tenacity in digging through and going through government files and documents. And, with regard to their book, I would just make the argument, having read it and having spent time with Scott and Suzanne, their book is not a UFO book. I would rather characterize it as a great real-life detective story, because really they take a very, very common-sense approach to this situation and trying to find facts, evidence, and correlations with the various individuals and aspects of this story. It's not a UFO book in that sense. I think if anybody is fascinated with detective work, Scott and Suzanne definitely qualify as the best private investigators I've ever met. And I think Scott and Suzanne would also say that they're not UFO researchers; they're Aztec UFO researchers. They're not chasing every light in the sky story.
Right.
They've been focused on one specific case, and I just want to give them credit. It's not often you see people dedicate their lives, and Dr. Thayer as well, to focusing on one specific case and just continuing to drill down deeper and deeper. And I know with Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer, I, like many people, kind of fell into that narrative that was put out there that they were con artists. And as I think Scott alluded to, Silas Newton had no reason to be a con artist. He was extremely financially successful. And when you start pulling on those threads as they have, you realize very quickly the story doesn't add up. And then it begs the next question, well, then why are we being told this narrative? And it really opens it up to this discussion that we're having on the show today.
Right.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, at the time of Silas Newton and Leo Gaybauer, and this is coming from an FBI document. Now, keep in mind, this is 48 to 49. He had $20 million cash in his personal bank account. I don't know what that would be equivalent today, but that would be huge. And as we've learned over the years, his personal holdings were endless. And Leo Gaybauer, who we would all like to read the horror stories about what a con artist he was, actually, and Frank was there, we went to the first development that his construction company built in Arizona. And these are, I don't want to call them huge homes, but they were 4,000 square foot homes back in the day.
Right.
And they had, we were led to believe that, Leo Gaybauer was an electronics salesman that sold TV vacuum tubes. Well, that part is true. That was his hobby, trading in electronics, but he had a very successful contracting business.
Wow, interesting. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do that calculation. It looks like something like $2.4 billion, possibly. That may be off, but yeah.
A billion here and a billion there. Pretty
Yeah.
soon we're talking a little bit of money.
A buck or two, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Dave, do you have anything else for us? And I'd also like to give a plug. I know you still have your GoFundMe up there. Can you talk a little bit about
sure.
that in the archives? Just before you do that, yeah, go ahead. It's not letting me calculate it. That's too bad. Oh yes. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was $214,729,083.
Not bad.
That's what 20 million is worth from 1948 to now. Yes. So go ahead, Dave, if you would.
Yeah, I've been collecting a lot of historical material, and Scott and Suzanne have been very instrumental in putting me in touch with some witnesses regarding the Farmington research, but that's, of course, just one of a number of cases I've been looking at. And we've talked before, I've kind of set up a GoFundMe site just for anybody that does feel like they would, financially like to assist with endeavors like trips out to Maxwell Air Force Base and other things like that, and also securing these historical collections. It's great that Scott and Suzanne have been able to preserve some of Steinman's research for future generations. And I think that's very important. And I know that we share that passion for history and for preservation of this information, not just for ourselves, but for certainly future generations of researchers. And so I just want to commend them for their efforts. And just one last question before I go for Scott, Suzanne, and Dr. Thayer is if they could maybe just touch a little bit more. Obviously, I live here in New Mexico like Dr. Thayer. If they could just touch a little bit more on the Los Alamos connection with regard to this case, because I was really fascinated by that.
Yeah, and as a crow flies, how far is that?
Yeah.
And you want to start out, Frank?
150 miles, just sort of southeast from Aztec. And we figured that's where the disc was taken first, and that's where the scientists first examined it before they got in touch with their old friend Silas Newton, who was a geophysicist. He was not just an oil guy. He was he had advanced degrees from the University of Berlin. He was a very educated man. And they told him the story. He told Scully the story, and that's how it got out from under the military. And they had to go to extreme lengths to stop it. But Los Alamos is still one of the most secret places in New Mexico. And Scott's been on the base. He's had secret clearance.
I'll be there at the end of the month.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Yeah, my brother-in-law worked there. I lived in Los Alamos for a while. I don't know if I ever said that on the show. For, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so. And my brother-in-law was at the lab. Couldn't talk about much, or didn't talk about much. Yeah.
Dave, we sure want to appreciate you calling in, and our best to you and Kendra. And thanks for all the research that you do too. We had such a good time with you, and it was such a treat to be with people that value history and accurate documentation of history as you do. It was it was almost like we don't get a chance to do that very often, be with people of that quality, and it was just a feeding frenzy.
Yeah.
It was. We took advantage of three full days there. We went through a lot of files.
They really did.
Wow.
Hey, your big day's coming up. Good luck to you.
Thank
Oh,
you
yeah.
very much.
Yeah, come up in
Yes.
May. And
And we look
Yes.
to the story of the real story of Farmington. It's a wonderful story. And
Yes.
we're going to do
Oh
justice.
my gosh. It's needed to be told properly, and it's in good hands.
that's right. All right, Dave, thanks so much.
Thank you, and great show.
All right, take care. All right, a question I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask you first, Scott and Suzanne, and that is: were there times when you felt like giving up, like I've had it, and or did you just stayed right on this? It seems like everyone goes through those phases, and I just wondered to hear that from you.
I don't know. I think there's days you get frustrated. Many trips down to Maxwell, and there's 10,000 or 10 million file boxes. 10 million.
Yeah.
No, I mean the entire history of the Air Force is sitting in this building. It looks like
Wow.
a building out of Indiana Jones. And of course, you don't have free reign.
Yeah.
But you get down with your list, and I'd like documents on this, and this. And they either come back with we're going to read it, and we're going to think about it and pass it on to the intelligence folks. And you could be there I've gotten down there Sunday night to be there first thing Monday and left Friday when they were throwing me out the door. And some trips you come back with a couple of gems, and some trips you come back with absolutely nothing. And the Air Force is incredibly good to work with. I want your listening audience to know that. They're not sticking the muds like, well, we don't even like you UFO people being here. Total opposite. They're great people, very professional, but just they have a job to do. And because of many reasons, sources, methods, and means is the top one. They can't always give you documents even from back in 1948 if those sources are still being used, or the methods or the means. But yeah, sometimes driving back late Friday night back to North Carolina, it's kind of like, well, I spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and I'm coming back with nothing.
Right.
But that would a good night's sleep, and that would change.
Well, and I can say that since we've been married, we're on our way to 16 years. And since we've been married, except for the last, I would say probably 8 months, we've taken our first real break in all that time.
Is that right?
Including we've had some other obligations, but including our honeymoon, all but 2 of our days of our honeymoon, we have talked and worked on this project and have had a passion. And I tell you what, and I know we don't have time because we're going to a break, but
No more
there are
breaks.
Okay.
Oh, okay. There are so many instances where, and I can think of one when we were in Minneapolis, and we were at the University of Minnesota, and both of us were tired, and you don't even know. You know what you're looking for, but you don't always know when you're going to find it. And they brought up the boxes, and you have to wear white gloves, and these boxes have been in the archives underneath ground. There's several floors. Nobody's looked at them. We're sitting going through documents, and you find a treasure. And you find something, and it's like a treasure hunt. And you're so giddy, you can hardly control yourself, and you have to be quiet in this library because, everybody, that's the rules. But it's things like that. It seems like every time that we start, and I'm sure Frank's going to mirror this, that every time that we get to the point that we think, maybe we just need to take a big break on this. Either somebody comes into our lives or a new piece of information or something that gets us all juiced up again. And I'll pass it to you, Frank. I'm going to step up for a second and turn on the light because it's getting kind of dark.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Can you reach it?
Okay. And carrying on what Suzanne was saying, the discovery at the University of Wyoming was a bonanza.
Oh.
Yeah.
Frank Scully's father, nobody had ever looked at them. Nobody had seen them.
Wow.
They
Except for the Air Force, right before we got there.
Gee, I wonder what they were looking for. But wire recordings from the late 40s and early 50s. Thanks to our friend Mike Price, we got those things transferred into digital. And so we have the Silas Newton lecture to the University of Denver captured in its entirety. And you can listen to Silas Newton talking to that class of science students. And that's how Frank Scully started his book.
Now, how long after the incident was that?
That was March 1950 when he did that.
Yeah, 1950.
Yeah, the University of Denver, when Silas Newton broke the news to the world through the students that a UFO had been recovered in northern New Mexico.
And that was a bombshell, boy. The Air Force was looking for him.
The Air Force was on,
X.
the Air Force was on the campus before the lecture was over.
Yeah.
Is that right? Wow, that's amazing. So, Frank, the question was: have you stayed steadfast to in your research, or has this been one that you've had to put down now and then?
I think that I've retained my enthusiasm from the time I first read Steinman's book and wrote an essay. That's how Scott found me. Scott and Suzanne found me. So at least for the last 10 years, I've maintained my enthusiasm. There is so much more stuff if we only had the time to assemble it, write it. It's just going to confirm what we've already proved. We have proved the case as far as I'm concerned. And now it's just time to bring up some stuff from underground and add to it to show that this is the case, and maybe it is more powerful than Roswell. I'm not saying it is, but I think I'm biased.
Okay.
You know, I might mention something too real quick if I could. Sure. Is one of the things that we have never had an opportunity to do in the two books that we've written. You're limited by the number of illustrations, the number of pages. So out of 55,000 documents, we had to pick and choose and try to piece together as much as we can. One of the things that's never been done is there is nobody that has ever told the whole story, the entire story, and all the people that have been involved with it. There's a city council person, there's sheriffs, there's people that it's not been released. And so that's something that I think that keeps us juiced up, is to be able to, in one form or another, tell the comprehensive story and really have history documented, and then how all of our research supports that. So I didn't mean to cut you short, but I think that's really important to know.
I agree. It would be nice to tell that story, and maybe we'll get to do it.
We're working on it.
I'd like to add one thing. Stanton Friedman, of course, over the years has jumped into the Aztec fray and been a big help. Mm-hmm. He was one that had it in the gray basket for years, never in the black basket, never in the white basket, but in the gray basket. And we just had dinner with Stan a few months back, and he's very enthusiastic. There's a gentleman that needs a little bit of attaboys, Bob Coford, out in California. Bob has taken a big interest in Aztec, and he is a document, in my opinion, world-class expert. He has dug up documents that in places that we've been, but we didn't find them. And CIA, for one, we could do a whole show on Bob Coford. And he has been really good in helping us and supporting us. And if we do another book, which of course we're talking about, Bob will probably be on our team. Steinman was going to be on our team, and then he had to drop dead one night. Unfortunately, I lost a good friend.
He really was a treasured person.
Yeah, but Coford's work is incredible, and it's all centered on Aztec.
Yeah. And I might add too, and I'm sorry, Frank, in terms of Bill Steinman too, something that we were really honored with is he wrote the second book about Aztec, and then when Scott got in contact with him, Bill vetted Scott very heavily and took time to get to know him before he would share any information. And he became such a dear friend of ours, and it was really nice to be able to work as a team and have him as a member of the team and us be a member of his, instead of competing, or sometimes that gets nasty. It really was an honor. And I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I agree with Suzanne. Bob Coford has found a lot of stuff about March 25th, 1948. The American government suddenly woke up and March 25th was a very big day for the American government.
Yep.
I wonder why.
And the 26th, those 2 days when this
Yes.
hit, it changed history as we know it today.
He'd be a great guy for you to have on the show.
Oh,
Yes.
now, about witnesses, approximately how many witnesses were to the crash itself? Are you aware of that?
I think I've pieced together, not that we were able to talk or know all of them, but it looks like 16 people.
16. And then afterwards, there was the military, there were purportedly the scientists. And can you talk about the scientists and Scully, the connection there?
Frank Scully, in his book, and by the way, those that want to reach out and buy one on Amazon, it's called Behind the Flying Saucers. It was the first hardback book ever published on the subject of flying saucers. Frank Scully, in his book, takes 8 to 9 scientists, there were 9, one died, and puts them under one umbrella and refers to them as Dr. G. And that was another part of Aztec that got poo-pooed over the years, were some of the crazy claims these scientists made when they sat down and were interviewed by Frank Scully. Such as these scientists said during World War II, they had $1 billion budget, which nobody could even fathom $1 billion in 1950, and that they had technology that they could sniff out subs underwater, and in one day took out 7. Well, people reading that book in 1950 said, come on, World War II was only over 5 years ago, and we've never heard of this technology. Well, it turns out by the time 1990, 1995 rolled around, and with the help of the people at Texas Instruments, we found out that technology did exist, and we found out that the special group that worked on everything and splintering off, including the Manhattan Project, their budget was $1 billion annually. Now we started taking the clues that Frank Scully did. Have you ever read his book, Martin?
No.
Behind the Flying Side? If you need a copy, I've got one. You start like peeling back the onion on each scientist that Scully talks about, and then you look at who the scientists that were in these programs. You can go, well, that's easy. That's this guy, and that's this guy. I say easy. It took us 3 years.
He creates almost like riddles in the book. So he doesn't directly say their names.
Yeah, he doesn't say the names.
He gives like a riddle.
A little hint of, well, he got his degree at this college and then went to Berlin, Germany, and finished another degree, and then came back and worked for the War Department. And we had to sit there, and a lot of people helped on this. Frank Warren from the UFO Chronicles was a big help. And we just had to mold all these resumes together and see who it fit. And the one that we came up with that was most fascinating was Jonathan
Torrance
Tate, that after the war went back to the University of Minnesota and died just weeks before Frank Scully's book came out, sadly. So the scientists were real. They weren't a figment of Frank Scully's imagination.
But these were world-class scientists. I mean, they were amazing people.
And handpicked to work for those projects during World War II.
Yep.
And therefore naturals to be working on something unknown, such as a flying disc.
Yep. Yep.
And you wonder, or I wonder, I should say, pardon me, where all the tinkering, did it lead to anything? Did they figure anything out? I mean, when I saw your disc, a picture of your disc that you had, and there's absolutely no place that it looks like there's any any propulsion to it at all. So it's interesting. And the thing you said at the beginning of the show, someone reached in with like a pole and pushed a button and a door opened. That sounds primitive almost.
Well, you got to remember all the oil field workers out there, those trucks, and we have a brother-in-law that works out there in the oil fields, They have a lot of equipment on those trucks. They have winches, they have welders. We could go on and on and on. And they also have to sometimes be their own fire truck in case they have a fire. And it was described that it was a fire pole that was pushed through the porthole.
I didn't mean the use of the fire pole. I meant that a button could be pushed on the inside.
Right.
You know.
Well, but a couple things that they found, and think of where we're at today, was they saw where you would push your handprint in, or their handprint in, right, to, I guess, drive something. Would that be an accurate description? Around the dome, there was a reflective glass, like that you couldn't see that there was anything there, and it was almost like the sunglasses that the old highway patrolmen you used to wear. Right, weird glasses, which that didn't exist. There were CDs like type things with information on them. So there were. Am I thinking? What are some things else that I'm missing?
Oh, how about the consoles that they described as looking like little typewriters? And of course, in 1948, that's what they thought they were. Obviously, with some sort of computers were operating the ship. And they were described in 1949 terms, not in terms that we see today.
Right, right.
We could have learned something. Who knows?
Flat TV-like screens that, 1950 when you read Frank Scully's book, that didn't actually come out till Steinman's book, but you'd look at that and say, flat TV-like screens. Well, we're talking to you on one. It's crazy, but you could see where in 1950 when people read Scully's book, they put it down and shake their head and say, this is a Buck Rogers book. It's not a UFO book.
And was he trying to be as factual as he could at the time?
Yes, and actually he was extremely factual.
100%.
We have tried to go and to see if that everything was accurate and look for any problems. We have never found anything.
But he
wrote a breezy journalistic style, and you think, well, maybe he's just a Hollywood reporter. But everything he said is checked out backward and forward, and we've been over it so many times. And you got to respect the guy. He knew what he was doing, and he never revealed the names of those scientists.
Up, not even to his wife and children.
Yes.
But the book was totally discredited at the time.
Yes.
Everything about the book was discredited.
There's a person by the name of J.P. Kahn, and we've used his name, but I don't think we've told who he is. J.P. Kahn, at the time when Scully received this information, Scully received this information about the craft and was asked to go ahead and tell the story. He put out a few short stories and articles in some magazines. And J.P. Kahn was a person that worked for the San Francisco Chronicle. He really had a desk there. He was independently wealthy, never had to work a day in his life. He was inherited his wealth. So he would go to his desk and have fun, more or less, really. That's my interpretation, but that's really more or less what he did. And he got wind of these stories, and he had told the management of the San Francisco Chronicle, I can get this information, and I'll just write the story, and we can run with it. Well, he's a very arrogant man, and he went to Scully and said, I'd like to buy that information from you. And Scully said, I can't release that information, who the scientists are, and I'm in the process of writing it anyway, so no. So numerous times, J.P. Kahn came back with higher and higher money and trying to persuade, because he had made promises that he was going to get this done. And he, obviously Scully said no. So J.P. was so upset that he went about with his wealth and his free time discrediting every single person. And we have research and we have information, you could read it, that talks about J.P. Kahn sending to J. Edgar Hoover.
Well, we have a copy of the original letter that was sent to J. Edgar Hoover by J.P. Kahn.
Really?
And
Wow.
there are numerous occasions that
Yes.
he just step by step discredited, and that's where the hoax really comes in. You can see, again, we are able to prove this with forms, but that was what he was out to do, was discredit it. And I think it must have worked hand in hand with what the government wanted to do anyway.
And between that and the court, the trial of the oilmen, or it wasn't actually oilmen, but the
Doodlebug.
yeah, the doodlebug people
Right.
for an investment and all that. Yeah. So today, what is the biggest battle? The biggest struggle in trying to get this story out there, against the skeptics?
Well, I've never ever paid any attention to the skeptics because I never met one that actually did any research on it. They like to go back and read Wikipedia or a story written by Ken Purdy from True Magazine and use that as their actual criteria. Exactly.
Hang on, we have a call. Keep that thought, if you would.
Okay.
Hang on to that thought. We have a call just coming in right now. Caller, welcome to the show. Your first name, where are you calling from?
I'm William from Poola, Georgia.
Hi.
I have
William.
a couple questions. Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I've been studying Roswell and the Aztec UFO crash and other incidents for many, many years. And one of the most interesting things I've found in support of the Aztec UFO, and I've heard this before, is that there were field ration cans found at the spot where the crash allegedly happened.
Yes,
And I was wondering if they
Yes, we have.
Mhm.
Do you have any photographs of them that you could post online to show
Well,
people?
I'd have to dig through, but the bad news is we found out those K-ration cans were sold up until about 1985 at the local Alamo military surplus store. And I sat down with the owners and they said, these are World War II. They were like 1944 date on them. And we actually found M1 clips too, from an M1 Garand. But then they let the air out of me by telling me that the M1 Garands were also sold at their other gun store as surplus back in the 50s, 60s. So the K rations were probably left behind by deer hunters that were out. It's a wonderful place to catch or to go hunt deer, thus the name Hart Canyon.
Heart meaning deer.
Hart meaning deer in
German.
I believe. But yeah, I'm sure I had pictures of them somewhere. We found an old beech nut chewing tobacco pouch that Beech Nut said was about 1946 to 1948. They used the actual aluminum, that same material. They couldn't give us an exact.
So it could have been from the military, but it could have also been from hunters.
It could have been from hunters, yeah.
Because they were sold right there in the area. So it doesn't discredit it, but it's not a sure thing.
Yeah. Could it be? We'd like to think it is, but the Alamo military surplus store kind of let the wind out of my sail on that one.
You said you had another question, William?
Yes, I've also been studying the whole story about Wilbert Smith and his connection to Sarbacher and how it leads to Eric Walker and Vannevar Bush. And have you came across any evidence that Wilbert Smith or anyone even loosely associated with the Research and Development Board that was ran by Vannevar Bush during that time period had gained access to the bodies or wreckage from Aztec? And that's my question, and I guess I'll just hang up and listen. Thank you so much for all your great research.
Thanks.
Thanks, William.
It was Bill Steinman that actually broke that whole Sarbacher case wide open. Bill just sat down one day on a lead that Sarbacher knew something about Aztec and wrote him. and this is before before Sarbacher passed away. And Sarbacher said, I was not privy to pictures of the craft, nor was I there, but he confirmed that Frank Scully's book was about 99% accurate. And so really Steinman broke that. And when he was talking about Wilbur Smith, Wilbur was a very famous Canadian scientist. He wasn't given enough credit for what he actually did. If you open up a quick resume on Wilbur Smith, it kind of downplays what he did, but he did do some liaison work with our government and had a very top secret clearance. So would he have been in the loop on something like that? Probably, most likely.
Interesting.
There's a whole list of people that would fit that being involved.
Good questions, William.
Yeah, very good question.
Yeah.
You're really doing good research if you came up with those.
Keep up the good work.
One of the things that I get email from, and I do try to answer all my email when I can, is that a lot of people will write and say, why do you always bring up old cases? Why not, talk about different cases and newer cases and all that? But I think there's really a reason for that. And the reason is you talk about, peeling the onion. You keep finding more and more. Do you think there's still a lot more to find on this case?
Yes. Yeah.
Of course.
I don't know in our lifetime if we'll find him.
Yeah, I hit that big 62 this summer.
But it is amazing that all these years, 30-some years, that we're still able to track certain things. And that's amazing to me.
One thing to keep in mind, Martin, the United States Air Force has never said Aztec did not happen. That's an interesting. It's like Project Blue Book. At the end, the conclusion was UFOs. They don't say UFOs don't exist. They say UFOs we have deemed are not a threat to our national security. The interesting group of documents to support that we have were the FBI, the Air Force, and Army counterintelligence tried to do a sting operation at the Edelweiss Bar in downtown Denver. And the three groups of intel, and these are letters right from them, that they were trying to intercept photographs of not just a UFO, but the Aztec, a flying saucer that crashed and was recovered in Aztec, New Mexico. That it doesn't get any plainer than that. The sting operation went bad, and they did not recover the photographs. They recovered the seller and the buyer, but were not able to obtain the actual photographs.
Now, as far as you know, were any of the 16 witnesses that saw the crash, did any of them take pictures?
No.
No.
The only reference to photographs is Chris Evans, an incredibly good researcher, passed away in 2005. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. He sat down with Frank Scully's wife, and she confirmed, because Frank Scully made reference, the Dr. G talked about the pictures they took at the crash, the scientist. Alice Scully confirmed to Chris Evans that, yes, photographs were taken. She had seen them. Frank Scully had seen them, but would not give any more information as to who had them and where they were.
Wow.
Additionally, there were the research, was it procurement or the research, or George that had seen pictures?
Oh, yes, our gentleman we referred to in the book that was at Walker Air Force Base, coordinating the Aztec recovery. One of the many people coordinating it said he did not ever see the craft, but had daily briefs, and he saw, excuse me, black and white photographs of the craft.
Wow. Well, you know what? I can't believe this already, but we are already at the end of the show.
Already?
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. But thank you so much. And I am actually doing this alone. I'm going to have to ask you something that's a little awkward here. I'm going to have to ask you to hang up when I say goodbye because I can't do that here. I usually have help. But anyway, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, a really interesting case. And hopefully you'll stay at it. I don't know how many more years you can do it, but you have the passion for it, and that's great. And I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Okay, so that's it for the show this evening. Thank you all for checking it out and listening. We'll be back next week. And let's see, who do we have next week? We have Stephen Ward next week. Oh yes, he's in the Midwest. Some people know him on Switchblade. He calls into some show. We're not going to call him that. But anyway, he'll be back next week, and it should be an interesting one. So I want to thank everyone that helps out. And we are totally out of time. So remember to keep your eyes to the sky, and we'll see you next week.